I always thought living in a quiet suburban neighborhood meant peace. You know, the kind: white picket fences, perfectly mowed lawns, friendly neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. I had a nice routine, a small garden I tended with care, and a home I loved. Life was simple, predictable, and comfortable. That illusion shattered the day I met Karen. Karen was the HOA president, but calling her that barely scratches the surface. She had a sharp business suit, a clipboard that never left her hand, and a presence that made people straighten their backs without realizing it. She could spot a crooked mailbox from 3 streets away, and trust me, she wasn't afraid to fine you for it. I laughed when neighbors whispered about her obsession with control. Surely, I thought, she can't be that intense, can she? The first signs were minor, almost laughable. A letter arrived in my mailbox one sunny morning, all official looking and full of legal jargon. It said my mailbox was 0.3 inches above HOA standard. I stared at the letter, confused, then looked at my mailbox with a measuring tape in hand. Sure enough, it was slightly taller than the allowed height. I wanted to laugh, I wanted to throw the letter away. But deep down, I sensed this was just Karen warming up. Over the next few weeks, little things started piling up. Another letter arrived, this one about my lawn. Apparently, the grass at the edge of my driveway was unacceptable and needed trimming immediately. I stepped outside and measured the blades like a mad scientist. It was barely over the arbitrary limit. I rolled my eyes and mowed it anyway, muttering about Karen and her obsession with perfection. Then there were the neighbor complaints. "Your garden gnomes are too aggressive," one note read. Another said, "The color of your flowers doesn't match the HOA-approved palette." I had no idea such rules even existed. At first, I laughed, thinking this was a quirky little ritual of suburban life. Karen was the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer, a stickler for rules, but nothing serious, at least that's what I thought. Then one morning, everything changed. I was enjoying my coffee on the porch when a neighbor ran up to me, pale and breathless. "You need to see this," she said, holding a stack of papers. Confused, I took them and skimmed through. My heart skipped a beat. One of the papers looked official, too official, and it said something that made my blood run cold. My house sold without my permission. I blinked at the papers, thinking maybe my neighbor was joking, maybe it was some kind of prank. But no, the documents were real, complete with signatures that weren't mine and an amount that didn't belong to me. I felt my chest tighten and a cold shiver ran down my spine. Karen, she had done this. I didn't know how or why, but one thing was certain: my life as I knew it had just tipped into chaos. I immediately called the HOA office, trying to understand the mistake. The line clicked and buzzed, then Karen's voice came through, sweet, calm, helpful, or at least she wanted me to think so. "Oh, there must be some kind of clerical error," she said, her tone almost syrupy. But there was something in her voice, a slight edge that set my nerves on fire. I wanted answers, but all I got were vague excuses and promises to look into it. That's when I realized this wasn't a simple HOA annoyance. Karen wasn't just strict or petty, she was clever, calculated, and dangerous. The tiny fines and letters were just the surface. Beneath it all, something bigger, something illegal was brewing, and I had just stepped into the middle of it. I paced my living room, staring at the documents, my mind racing. How could someone sell my house without my knowledge? Who else was involved? And most importantly, how was I going to get my home back? One thing was clear: Karen wasn't someone I could confront lightly. She was meticulous, observant, and I realized with sinking dread she had already anticipated my every move. And just like that, my peaceful life in suburbia was gone. The rules, the fines, the quirky letters, it was all just a prelude to a storm I hadn't even seen coming yet. I didn't know it then, but the moment I decided to fight back, a battle unlike anything I had ever imagined had begun. And Karen, she had no idea I was about to turn her own game against her. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept turning the documents over and over in my mind, staring at my living room walls as if they might suddenly offer answers. How could someone sell my house without me knowing? I had bills, keys, personal belongings. I lived there. Every scenario I imagined was worse than the last. My stomach churned, and every sound outside my window made me jump. The next morning, I forced myself to act. I called the HOA office again. The phone rang, and I almost hung up, fearing Karen might pick up first, but she answered, her voice silky like nothing had happened. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "How can I help you today?" My hands were shaking. I held the documents in front of me, though she couldn't see them, and I demanded answers. There's been some kind of administrative mix-up," she said, smiling too wide. Her words dripped with calmness, but I could sense the calculation underneath. Something about that tone told me she knew exactly what was going on. I pressed harder, asking to see all the paperwork and the signatures she had filed. Karen stammered, claiming she'd look into it and promised to call me back. That call never came. I decided I couldn't wait. I had to see the records myself. I drove to the HOA office under the guise of asking about a routine neighborhood inspection. The office was tucked between two beige townhouses, looking perfectly innocent. I entered, pretending to be friendly while scanning for any sign of chaos. Karen was behind her desk, looking far too calm. She smiled at me, her clipboard pressed like a shield. "Hello," she chirped. "What brings you here today?" Her eyes, though, were sharp, almost predatory. I felt a chill run down my spine. I asked to review the documents related to my house sale. Karen hesitated, glancing at a locked drawer behind her desk. Her hesitation was brief, but it was enough. My gut screamed that I was close to uncovering something dangerous. Then I saw it. Among the neatly stacked files, I noticed my name on forms I never signed, on deeds stamped with dates I wasn't even home. Karen had been forging signatures and selling houses in the neighborhood without homeowners' knowledge. My pulse pounded as I flipped through the papers. Every signature was slightly off, every date suspicious. My house, my sanctuary, had been put up for sale by a woman obsessed with power. Karen's expression changed in an instant. Her smile faltered and she leaned forward. "Is there something you're looking for?" she asked, her voice no longer sweet. I realized she had noticed me noticing. Panic flashed in her eyes just for a second. That was the opening I needed. I pretended to be curious about a different file, casually flipping papers, all the while photographing evidence with my phone. The adrenaline was insane. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I collected every scrap of proof I could without alerting her. Every drawer I opened, every stack I moved, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope. One wrong move and Karen would know I was onto her. And I wasn't sure what she would do if she realized how close I was. Finally, I had enough evidence to confirm my worst fears. Karen was not just a strict, annoying HOA president, she was committing fraud and my house was part of her scheme. I left the office trying to act casual, but my mind raced. Who else was involved? How many other neighbors had fallen victim to her manipulation? And most importantly, what would be my next move? I knew I couldn't confront her directly yet. She was cunning and she thrived on intimidation. Every step needed to be calculated. I drove home slowly, gripping the steering wheel so tightly it left marks on my palms. I stared at my house as I pulled into the driveway and a thought struck me. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She had no idea I was about to fight back. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence I had collected, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. I realized this battle wasn't going to be simple. Karen was clever, meticulous, and ruthless, but I had one advantage. I knew what she was hiding and she didn't know I knew. And for the first time since discovering the sale, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. The game had begun and I was ready to play. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was already aware of my curiosity. I walked past her office on my way to get the mail, and I could have sworn she glanced up with a tiny smirk, the kind that makes your stomach twist. That smile meant trouble, and I knew I had to tread carefully. One false move, and I could be the next victim of her machinations. I spent the day packing around my house, replaying the documents I had photographed in my mind. Every signature, every date, every official stamp screamed fraud. Karen had taken advantage of the system and of me without blinking an eye. I wondered how many neighbors had fallen prey before me. The thought made my blood run cold. By afternoon, I decided I had to go back. I needed more concrete proof, something undeniable. I grabbed my backpack, slipped in my phone, a small flashlight, and a notebook. Pretending to take a casual stroll, I approached the HOA office again. The building looked the same, neat and unassuming, but inside, chaos was lurking, masked by Karen's polished facade. When I entered, Karen was there, as always, sitting behind her desk, exuding calm authority. "Back again?" she asked, tilting her head, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I nodded and made a casual comment about inspecting neighborhood paperwork, trying to sound innocuous. She narrowed her eyes, the first sign of suspicion I had seen, and I felt a thrill of fear and excitement. I moved around the office slowly, pretending to examine files for minor neighborhood complaints, but my attention was laser-focused on a drawer labeled Private HOA Transactions. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it open. Inside were stacks of deeds, contracts, and unsigned documents. And there it was, my house listed again, this time alongside several other properties. My heart raced. Karen hadn't just targeted me, she had built an entire network of unauthorized sales. I flipped through the files quickly, photographing each one. Each house had forged documents, signatures that were almost perfect but just off enough to be suspicious. Some were marked as sold, others pending. I realized Karen had been running this operation for months, possibly years, right under our noses. Then I heard it, a faint shuffle behind me. My stomach dropped. Karen was standing there, leaning against her desk, watching me. "Curious, aren't we?" she said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp and calculating. I froze, my mind racing for an excuse. I smiled awkwardly. "Just making sure all the neighborhood files are in order," I said. Karen's lips twitched, barely holding back a smile. She took a step closer, her presence suddenly overwhelming. "You know," she said, "some things are better left untouched. Digging too deep can create problems." The air felt thick with threat. My pulse surged, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had the evidence, I couldn't back down now. I casually closed the drawer and moved toward the exit, keeping my phone tucked securely. Karen's eyes followed me, calculating, suspicious, but she didn't stop me. I walked out of the office, heart pounding, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. I had uncovered her scheme, but now I realized just how dangerous this woman could be. Back at home, I spread the photographs of the deeds across my dining table. I traced signatures, compared dates, and connected the dots. Karen wasn't just overzealous, she was committing serious fraud. Each photo told a story of deception, manipulation, and greed. I could almost hear her smug laugh echoing in my mind, imagining her thinking she had the upper hand. But I had something she didn't: knowledge, and knowledge is power. I realized I couldn't confront her alone, not yet. I needed allies, evidence, and a plan. I started jotting down ideas, thinking of neighbors who had quietly complained about her, remembering the whispers of other suspicious transactions. Together, maybe we could stop her. As the sun set, casting shadows across my living room, I felt the weight of the battle ahead. Karen was cunning, ruthless, and fearless, but she had underestimated me. I knew the next steps had to be precise. One wrong move could ruin everything. And yet, despite the fear gnawing at my nerves, I felt a spark of determination. Karen had started a war by selling my house without permission, and I was ready to fight back. The game had just begun, and this time I wasn't going to lose. After uncovering Karen's scheme, I thought I had the upper hand. I had the evidence, I knew what she was up to, and I could finally start planning my next steps. But I quickly learned that Karen didn't react like a normal person when cornered. She escalated fast and with precision. It started with emails. At first they were subtle, reminders about minor violations, warnings about my mailbox, my garden, my driveway. I tried to laugh them off, but the tone was different now: cold, deliberate, calculated. Each word seemed designed to make me doubt myself. I checked my phone obsessively, every notification making my chest tighten. Then came the phone calls. Karen's voice on the line was calm but icy. "You really should reconsider your approach," she said once, the kind of sentence that makes your skin crawl. I could almost hear the smugness behind it, the thrill of control she got from intimidation. Every conversation ended with a warning that wasn't exactly a threat, but it felt like one. Even worse, she started sending letters. Hundreds of them meticulously addressed, citing obscure HOA rules that I didn't even know existed. "Your mailbox is 0.3 inches too tall," one letter read. Another warned that my garden gnomes were too aggressive for neighborhood standards. I started laughing at first, the absurdity of it all, but laughter faded quickly when I realized she was testing boundaries, probing how far she could push me. I noticed something else: Karen was always around. Driving past my house, she'd be lingering in her car, sometimes with a clipboard, sometimes just staring. I could feel her eyes even when she wasn't there. I started to notice other subtle things: neighbors whispering when she was nearby, packages arriving at odd times, letters that seemed almost designed to rattle me. The paranoia gnawed at me. One afternoon, I found a note slipped under my door. It wasn't signed, but it said plainly, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." My heart raced. The tone was unmistakable. Karen's intimidation had crossed from petty annoyances to outright threats. I considered calling the police, but I knew without proof they might dismiss it as HOA drama, and she knew it too. I realized I was being drawn into a psychological game, and Karen was playing to win. She was clever, manipulative, and fearless. Every move I made was being watched, measured, and countered. I had to act cautiously or risk losing everything. But amid the fear and tension, a spark of determination grew. Karen may have been ruthless, but I wasn't going to let her bully me out of my home. I started documenting everything: emails, calls, letters, even strange encounters in the neighborhood. I created a timeline of her actions, noting dates, times, and details that might seem small, but could become crucial evidence. Neighbors started noticing changes too. Quietly, some of them approached me, sharing stories of petty fines, unauthorized notices, or letters about their homes being sold. It was like peeling back a layer of a sinister onion, each revelation making Karen's operation seem even larger and more dangerous than I had imagined. Late at night, I'd sit at my dining table, surrounded by stacks of papers, typing up notes and thinking about my next steps. Karen was watching, testing, pushing boundaries. Every day felt like a tightrope walk, but I realized something important: she couldn't operate in the shadows forever. The more brazen she became, the more vulnerable she left herself. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I wasn't going to react impulsively. I wasn't going to confront her directly. I needed strategy, patience, and allies. Karen thrived on fear, on control, on the illusion that she could manipulate everyone in the neighborhood, but I had something she didn't: knowledge, proof, and determination. And I knew one thing for certain, her game of intimidation wasn't going to last much longer. The storm was coming, and when it did, it wouldn't just be me standing against her. The tide was about to turn. After weeks of threats, letters, and subtle surveillance, I realized something crucial. Fear alone wouldn't stop Karen. I needed concrete proof, something undeniable that could take down her operation once and for all. I had photographs of the forged deeds, emails, and signed notices, but that wasn't enough. Karen was clever and she covered her tracks meticulously. I needed more. I started by revisiting the HOA office, this time with a more calculated approach. I pretended to be a concerned neighbor interested in general neighborhood compliance. I smiled at Karen as she sat behind her desk, clipboard in hand, pretending to be busy. Her eyes flicked up, suspicious but not enough to catch me off guard. I had learned her patterns: when she relaxed, when she panicked, and when she was distracted. Today, I was counting on distraction. I wandered through the office, casually inspecting binders and filing cabinets, taking mental notes. My phone was in my pocket, discreetly snapping photos. Every drawer I opened revealed something new: memos about unauthorized sales, emails to a shady real estate consultant, and ledgers listing properties that weren't even supposed to be on the market. My stomach twisted as I realized how deep Karen's operation went. She wasn't just selling my house, she was running an illegal side business out of the HOA office. By mid-afternoon, I felt the adrenaline coursing through me. I was close to discovering the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that would leave Karen with no room to wiggle. I opened a locked cabinet, pretending to search for inspection reports, and there it was, a folder labeled pending transfers. Inside, my house was listed alongside 3 other properties that had been quietly sold or were about to be. Every document was signed with a forgery of my name. My hands shook as I photographed everything. I didn't have time to linger. Karen glanced up, frowning. I gave her a casual smile and nodded toward a binder she had left open on her desk. "Just checking something over here," I muttered. She tilted her head, suspicious, but I could see the relief in her eyes that I wasn't looking at the important folder. Timing was everything. I left the office, heart pounding, feeling like I had just escaped a high-stakes heist. Once home, I spread the photographs across my dining table. I traced each signature, compared dates, and organized every email and letter into a timeline. The evidence was undeniable. Karen had been orchestrating fraudulent sales for months, preying on unsuspecting homeowners, and now, with this proof, I had the ammunition to fight back. But I couldn't do it alone. Karen was cunning, and a single misstep could put me at risk. I began reaching out to neighbors, carefully, discreetly. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation, but once they saw the documents I had collected and shared their own experiences, letters, fines, notices of sales they hadn't authorized, they realized the scope of her deception. Slowly, a small group of allies formed, united by a common goal: stop Karen before anyone else fell victim. We started planning. Every detail mattered: how to present the evidence, how to involve authorities, how to ensure we weren't walking into a trap. Karen thrived on control, but this time the neighborhood had the advantage: numbers, proof, and strategy. I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, I sensed a glimmer of hope. Late that night, I sat at my dining table, reviewing the collected evidence again. Each photo, each email, each signed document told a story of fraud and manipulation. Karen had underestimated me, underestimated the community, and underestimated how far I was willing to go to reclaim what was mine. I knew she would retaliate, that the coming days would be tense, but for the first time, I felt ready. The pieces were in place, the allies were ready, and soon we would set the plan in motion. Karen's empire, built on intimidation and deceit, was about to face its reckoning. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The battle lines were drawn, the first moves made, and I knew one thing: Karen might have started the war, but she wouldn't finish it, not this time. The days after gathering evidence were some of the longest and most nerve-wracking of my life. Every time the mail arrived, I held my breath. Every car driving slowly down the street made my heart race. Karen didn't stop, her letters continued, her emails persisted, and the subtle surveillance of my house never wavered. I could almost feel her watching, waiting to see what my next move would be. I finally decided it was time to involve the authorities. Armed with photographs of forged documents, copies of emails, and the timeline I had meticulously compiled, I made my way to the local police department. The officers listened carefully, some skeptical at first, but as I laid out the evidence, I could see their expressions shift. This was no minor HOA dispute. This was fraud, and it was serious. Back home, I couldn't relax. Karen must have suspected something was happening. Her letters became sharper, more aggressive. One arrived stating that I was in violation of neighborhood standards and subject to immediate action. Another warned vaguely about unapproved activity concerning HOA properties. She never mentioned the police, but the threat was clear. She knew I was onto her, and she was desperate. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every creak in the house, every passing car made me jump. I double-checked my locks, made sure my evidence was secure, and kept my phone close at all times. I couldn't let Karen intimidate me, but her presence was suffocating like a shadow that never left. The stress was heavy, but it steeled my resolve. I had come too far to back down now. Neighbors started whispering about strange happenings at the HOA office. Some had seen Karen packing, others saw her frantically moving files late at night. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. It wasn't just me anymore, everyone could sense that something big was about to happen. The entire community seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the moment when Karen's web of deception would unravel. Then came the day. Early in the morning, just as the sun was starting to rise, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran to the window and saw police cars pulling into the HOA office parking lot. I couldn't believe my eyes, this was it. Months of careful planning, evidence gathering, and nerves had led to this moment. Karen's operation was about to face justice. I watched from my porch, gripping the railing, as officers filed out of their vehicles and approached the HOA office. Karen emerged briefly, a folder in her hands, looking flustered but trying to maintain composure. Her sharp smile was gone, replaced by panic and disbelief. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, realizing that all her careful schemes were about to be exposed. The officers entered the office with precision. I could see Karen gesturing, arguing, trying to protect her documents, but the authorities were methodical. They began confiscating files, computers, and any records that proved fraudulent activity. The sight was surreal. Months of fear, stress, and planning were finally coming to fruition. Neighbors slowly emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some whispered, others took videos from a distance, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of vindication. For once, it wasn't just me standing up against Karen. The entire neighborhood had witnessed the beginning of her downfall. As the raid continued, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Karen's panic was evident, her carefully constructed empire starting to crumble in real time. I knew the hardest part wasn't over, the legal proceedings, the aftermath, and reclaiming my home, but seeing the authorities take control of the situation was an immense victory. That morning marked a turning point. Karen's intimidation tactics, her fake sales, and her constant surveillance had no power over the law. I felt the first glimmer of peace I had experienced in months, but I also knew the story wasn't over. Karen's empire had collapsed in front of everyone's eyes, but there was still more to uncover and finalize. As I watched the last officer leave with boxes of evidence and Karen retreat into the office, I whispered to myself, "It's finally beginning to end, and this time I won't let it go unfinished." The morning of the raid felt unreal. I stood at my porch, coffee in hand, trying to steady my nerves as the neighborhood buzzed with whispered speculation. I had been preparing for months, gathering evidence, documenting every fraudulent action, and warning neighbors, but nothing could have fully prepared me for what unfolded next. The police arrived in force, their presence commanding and precise. Karen appeared in the doorway of the HOA office, clutching a folder as if it were a shield. She looked as though she had just been caught in the headlights, a deer frozen in the middle of a busy street. Her carefully curated aura of authority was gone, replaced by panic and disbelief. I watched as officers began meticulously seizing files, scanning computers, and taking notes. Karen tried to intervene, her sharp voice echoing across the parking lot. "This is unnecessary, you don't have the right," but her words fell flat. Every move she made was met with firm, procedural authority. For the first time, Karen realized that the system she had manipulated for so long was now working against her. Her reaction was almost cinematic. She flailed, papers scattering across the floor, desperately trying to gather evidence she thought would save her. I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of awe and satisfaction as I saw her panic, her empire, built on manipulation, intimidation, and deceit, crumbling right before my eyes. Neighbors slowly gathered at a safe distance, whispering and pointing. Some filmed the scene with their phones, others exchanged astonished glances. It was clear to everyone that the woman who had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist for years was finally being exposed. Karen's face twisted with disbelief as one officer approached her, handing her a notice of charges. Her confident smirk was gone, replaced by shock, humiliation, and fear. Inside the HOA office, officers found stacks of forged documents, unsigned deeds, and emails linking Karen to unauthorized house sales, including mine. I remembered the folder I had seen weeks earlier, labeled pending transfers. Now it was evidence in an official investigation. The irony was delicious. She had tried to manipulate the system, but she had underestimated one crucial thing: persistence and documentation. I could see Karen's frustration growing as officers methodically cataloged each piece of evidence. She tried to argue, to deflect, even to charm, but nothing worked. The law was clear and she was exposed. I felt a sense of vindication I hadn't realized I was holding onto. Months of fear, sleepless nights, and stress were finally paying off. The raid continued, and by midday, the HOA office had been emptied of incriminating documents. Karen was escorted out, her expression a mixture of anger, disbelief, and humiliation. She had no control, no authority, no influence. Her operation, once a well-oiled machine of intimidation and fraud, had collapsed entirely. As I watched from across the street, a neighbor approached me whispering, "I can't believe this is happening." "Finally, justice?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the entire ordeal starting to lift. The neighborhood was free from her tyranny, at least for now. It was surreal to see months of planning and preparation come together in real time. Despite the chaos, I felt a deep sense of calm settling over me. The fear that had haunted my mornings and kept me awake at night was gone. Karen's threats, her manipulations, and her constant surveillance had no power over me anymore. The victory wasn't just personal, it was for every neighbor she had tried to control. I knew the legal proceedings were only the beginning. Karen would face consequences beyond the immediate raid. But for that day, for that moment, justice had been served. I walked back into my house, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of months of stress lift from my shoulders. My home was mine again, and the nightmare that had overshadowed my life was finally over. And as I stood by the window, watching Karen being led away, I realized something important. Persistence, patience, and courage had won. She may have had power and fear on her side, but knowledge, preparation, and community could topple even the most imposing tyrant. Karen's operation was finished, but the story wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about reclaiming control, standing up to intimidation, and ensuring that no one else would fall victim to her schemes. And that realization made all the fear, stress, and sleepless nights worth it. The day after Karen's raid, the neighborhood felt different. Quiet, but in a calm, reassuring way, like the tension that had been gripping our streets for months had finally lifted. No more letters, no more emails, no more feeling like someone was watching every move. It was a peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving until it was gone. I walked around the neighborhood, waving at neighbors who were slowly emerging from their homes. There were smiles, nods, whispered thank yous. People I barely knew approached me, sharing their relief and recounting how Karen had affected their lives. Some had fines for imaginary violations, others had received letters threatening actions for trivial reasons. Many had suspected something illegal, but none had had the courage or the proof to confront her. Together, we had changed that. Inside my house, I began reclaiming my life. I sorted through old papers, organized my home office, and made sure my deeds, my documents, and my identity were secure. The stack of Karen's fraudulent papers that I had collected over months now felt like a monument to our victory. Every document represented fear conquered, intimidation resisted, and truth revealed. The HOA itself underwent a complete overhaul. With Karen removed, the board was replaced with responsible, transparent members. Rules were simplified, unnecessary fines were abolished, and the office now operated with oversight. It felt strange to know that the system Karen had abused for her own power was finally being used for the good of the community. I met with neighbors to discuss the changes and future safeguards. Everyone shared ideas on how to prevent another Karen from gaining influence. We laughed, we vented, and we celebrated. The camaraderie we developed through adversity was something none of us expected. There was power in unity, and the neighborhood now had it in full measure. For myself, there was still reflection to do. Months of stress, sleepless nights, and paranoia had left their mark. I realized that fear can be immobilizing, but knowledge and courage can be liberating. By standing up, documenting everything, and planning carefully, I had turned my fear into action. I had not only reclaimed my home, but also my peace of mind. Karen, she faced the consequences. Legal proceedings followed swiftly. The evidence we had gathered, along with the police report, ensured she couldn't manipulate or intimidate again. Her reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed, and her control over the HOA permanently ended. While I didn't relish seeing someone humiliated, it was satisfying to know that justice had been served and that she couldn't harm anyone else. Sitting on my porch one evening, I looked at my home, the street, the neighbors, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. What had started as a small, peaceful life had turned into a battle against fear and deception. But through it all, I learned that vigilance, courage, and persistence could overcome even the most relentless adversary. And then I smiled at a simple truth. Life in our neighborhood was no longer dictated by rules enforced out of fear. It was guided by fairness, transparency, and community. I could finally relax, plant my flowers without worry, and enjoy my home as it was meant to be enjoyed. Looking back, the ordeal taught me that standing up to someone like Karen wasn't just about protecting property. It was about defending principles, integrity, and the people around you. One overzealous, manipulative HOA president had tried to steal my home and intimidate a neighborhood. But in the end, preparation, unity, and courage prevailed. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my evening coffee, and realized that this story wasn't just mine. It belonged to every neighbor who had suffered quietly, every person who had felt powerless. Karen's collapse became proof that even the most cunning, controlling figures can be stopped when people refuse to be intimidated. The neighborhood was safe again, my home was mine, and for the first time in months I felt truly free. And that, I realized, was worth every sleepless night, every stressful day, and every cautious step I had taken. We had faced fear, deception, and manipulation, and we had won. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.